You're listening to the Business Mike podcast. Amazing interviews with entrepreneurs and industry thought leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business Mike podcast. And joining me today is Dr. Lucy. Dr. Lucy, can you just share with the listeners and the viewers a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Thank you so much, Daudi, for having me. What do I do? And a little about myself. Wow. I am in the business of building customer-centric businesses. And what I do is that I offer advisory services in customer experience, as well as customer experience training. Therefore, I'm a trainer. And I do combine that with quite a bit of research to gather both employees and customer insights. Yeah, and I've been running my own farm by the name Evolve CX for the last about 14 years, previously in the corporate world.
Wow, that's very interesting. 14 years in the consultancy business. I'm sure there are people looking at this interview right now and they would like to appreciate what that journey looks like. So most of the guests I have on the show don't necessarily start their careers in CX. They are normally from a different field. And along the way, they find themselves rooted in CX. So I don't know if it's the same for you. What was your journey from inception all the way to where we are today?
Yeah, it's the same for me. You know, I was once a budding food technologist, and I was given the role of a product research and development officer at my first job. And that role included working between marketing and quality. And guess what was put on my job description? Handling of customer complaints. And that's how my journey in CX started. Yeah, but completely from a different background. Of course, after that, I did build my skills in the area of business strategy. And that has really helped me in terms of just having a full understanding of the business.
Right. Earlier, before we started recording, we were talking about CX Week and how it becomes this phenomenon. Everybody gets on board. And you shared something very important with me where you said every week is CX Week. We shouldn't look to 1 week in a year, 1 out of 52 weeks to celebrate our customers. It should be every week. And so I'm just curious from your point of view, how the CX weeks over the years have evolved. Has this become a trend where it becomes more than a week? Do the organizations go bigger and bigger with every week, but only focusing on the week? How has it changed over the years?
Yeah, thanks, Daudi. And the good thing is that CX Week in Kenya has almost like become a tradition, and it was very exciting to see some small businesses have some activities during the CX Week. But if you look at the history of the CX Week all the way from 1992, when it started in the US, the idea was really to help create awareness about the importance of service and be able to do that both to the internal customers and also be able to focus a little bit more on the external customers. So here in Kenya, I have seen it evolve a lot. I think the first time that we tried to get organizations to participate was in the year 2010, and I remember at that particular time, just a few organizations participated in the CX Week. But today, we don't even have to encourage organizations to participate. And what I often see is that organizations are able to use that week to really leverage on customer experience, to have conversations around how to get their customer experience to the next level. Yes, every day is a CX day, every day is a CX, every week is a CX week, but that really celebration of our customers, of our staff, really helps us to get to the next level. So sometimes I call it the Christmas of customer experience professionals, because there's a lot of excitement, Yeah, there's a lot of celebration. And beyond that, I believe that organizations are able to at least push their customer experience to the next level just by having a focus on the customer during that week.
Yes, I do agree. But it is sometimes a double-edged sword, because there are scenarios that were reported whereby you're getting messages from this company that you no longer subscribe to, or perhaps you have a complaint and they're sending you all these messages. So there's a need to know what type of communication and who to send it to, because sometimes the broadcasting of these messages might not be appropriate depending on the relationship you have with your customer at that given time.
I totally agree. And I think there's a time organizations thought by just wishing our customers a happy customer service week, we will have done our part. But I've seen that really coming down. So it's not really just about sending out messages to customers. In fact, I'm one of the people I don't often advocate. We don't have to wish our customers a happy customer service week. We need to show them, by resolving their issues, if there are any outstanding issues, by introducing products that meet their needs or services that really address the pain points, really making the customers feel that we are focused on meeting their expectations. So it is not enough to just do what everybody else is doing. Every organization needs to really think about how can we use that 1 week out of the 52 to really get to improve on our customer experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, the entire organization bands behind this week. And shortly thereafter, they get back into their silos, which brings me to the crux of our discussion today in terms of being responsible as individuals throughout the entire organizations for customer experience. So what is your take on whose role it is to champion customer experience? Because there's a mindset that there's a department for that, and everyone doing the other roles do not necessarily have to partake in this particular cause, except for that one day in the 52. Other than that, really, there's someone to handle that. So that seems to be the case in many organizations.
Yeah. And there's this saying that customer experience is not a department, but probably the saying that I would even like to build up on is the one that states that customer experience is everybody's business. And sometimes when we say it's everybody's business, then a lot of times there's no one who takes accountability. And that's why, for me, what really makes a difference in organizations is when individuals pick up their individual responsibility. It's when an employee, regardless of their role, whether they're in the front office, whether they're in the back office, whether they're in finance or in IT, they are able to realize that they play a very important role in shaping the overall customer experience. And that's where the individual responsibility lies. And without that individual responsibility, then we are not able to see organizations excelling in customer experience. So my take is that every person needs to figure out what their individual responsibility is and be able then to commit to it, by having an attitude that is really focused on the customer, by taking up ownership, by really being ready to be held accountable for delivering an experience that is exceptional. Yeah. So every individual has a role to play in ensuring that the customers receive the best possible service and that the needs and the expectations of the customers are really met.
Yeah, well, I'll just give a scenario of where there might be pushback on that from some departments. I'll just use accounts as an example. The accounts department might say we deliver reports on time. The financial reports come out on time. Salaries are paid on time. So why then do we need to involve ourselves? Because technically we're executing as per our mandates. So how do you introduce that mindset of always having the customer in mind in anything that you do? Because yes, the accounting department might be executing their duties, but that fraction of a second late can have a ripple effect. Something as tiny as that could be so sensitive, but sensitizing them in that sense can sometimes prove to be a challenge.
Yeah, and interesting that you pick on accounts department or the finance department, the one that manages the monies that come from the customers. So I believe that by even just that simple knowledge that whatever monies they're managing is coming from the customers should help them focus a little bit more on the customer. I'm even thinking about the basics, of invoicing, of sending out the customer statements, of making it clear to the customers what the credit policy is, what are the credit limits, what is the credit policy. And even beyond that, you find a lot of times accounts or finance department, they have to support the salespeople in terms of getting out the quotations, in terms of product pricing. And sometimes they're not as fast as the salespeople would want them to be. And therefore, those delays can mean that there's a loss in terms of business, that the customer is not happy because of delays, delays even in invoicing. And therefore, just everybody then realizing that they have a role to play, even in terms of not only supporting the external customer, but supporting the internal customer who really is the face of the organization. I believe that should then push us to be able to take up our individual responsibility, irrespective of our role in our organizations.
Yeah, and the other challenge with that is the championing of this particular cause, because in as much as the CX manager, for instance, might want to preach to everyone the importance of valuing the customer, there is need to collaborate with the human resource department, maybe CFO, the top and senior management to have this top-down sensitization of the various heads and then trickling it down to the officers. But just from a layman's point of view, the KPI of the customer, how does that reflect in a role that's not necessarily client-facing? And how do you communicate the dangers of not necessarily focusing on the customer in these various roles? I think that's where sometimes we as CX champions have a challenge in organizations.
Yeah. Thanks, Daudi. And just back to the earlier question, I just remembered an organization where I worked and we were changing systems, and in the process of changing the systems, the entire accounting or invoicing system for the customers got messed up. And you can imagine the sort of challenges that we had, and as a result, customers expressed quite a bit of dissatisfaction. But because of the focus on the customer, we were finally able to resolve that. And coming back to your question, where you ask, how does a KPI, for me as someone in accounts, for me as someone in HR, for me as someone in procurement, why do I need to have or to be gauged on a CX metric? One of the things that I often like to say is that our CEOs or the founders of the businesses that we run, or the MDs, they really are the number one champion for customer experience. And because customer experience is directly linked to business performance, it is actually a pathway to business performance. Because when you think about business performance, it's really customers coming back or customers buying more. It's about customers referring other customers to us. And when you think about the performance indicators around the financials, as a whole organization, you're probably targeting this amount in terms of revenues, or even a particular amount in terms of profitability. And when that is then linked on the back end to customer experience, it makes it easier to achieve. And I like it when organizations then focus on a few CX metrics that everybody then is able to probably even be able to be held account to. But of course, there are other organizations that go further and break down the CX metrics. So, like, for example, if you're a support department, your metrics around CX have something to do with the service level agreements that you have with other departments, whether you're meeting the turnaround times, So there are different ways of looking at really measuring ourselves against set performance. But I believe that everyone, including the watchman at the gate, they need to have a measurement, that is around customer experience, that is around what the customer is saying, that is around the voice of the employee. And that way, then, we can be able to drive continuous improvement, because, again, we measure ourselves so that we can be able to capture some insights that will help us to get better. We don't just measure ourselves for the sake of measuring our performance. is so that we can be able to identify where there are gaps and even be able to capture some insights that then help us to keep moving forward. So that's my take, Daudi.
Yeah, I like what you said, especially about the Getman, because that's something that I've experienced. There was a time I was going to a bank, and the security personnel that check you for, if you have weapons or whatever, and there was a very long queue, and he could tell that I didn't want to stand in the queue. So he asked me, what have you come for? I said, I've just come to make an inquiry. He said, oh, what about? I told him, and then he told me, no, you just need this form, that form, and then you go there and they'll help you. So he had the knowledge that I needed, and I didn't have to queue up and wait for so many minutes. So that's just a simple example of how, if everybody is at least attuned to helping the customer, he didn't have to ask me for help, but he saw that I needed assistance, and he was able to execute to the best of his abilities. So that's a very, very critical point you've made there. Yeah, so that takes us to culture, and also the top down. I think there's also a need for leadership at the very top to really emphasize the need, and it's something that has been a running theme throughout all the conversations I've had with several guests, is how the leadership team themselves must embrace customer experience and not just leave the CX managers or champions to suffer the burden alone. And also there needs to be representation at that level for the customer, when decisions are being made, when certain cuts are being made, because all these actually have an impact on the customer. I just want to hear what your thoughts are at that particular level.
Thanks, Daudi. And just reflecting back, probably about 2 decades ago, there was a lot of lip service around customer experience, where people would just talk about it, but not, and especially the leadership, they used to talk about it about like a nice thing to have. But today, when I think about customer experience, even besides the individual responsibility, it's really a leadership responsibility, and the leadership must model it. The leadership must prioritize it in their strategic thinking. The leaders must really commit to driving CX at the corporate level in the departments that they also lead, because it's only when they take leadership on matters customer experience that we really are able to see the best of the brands, of the products, of the services that we offer. And just again, going back to culture, when I think about culture, it is our way of life, and when we make customer centricity our way of life, when we commit to really focusing on the customer, when we commit to putting the customer decisions that we make at the center of the actions that we make, when we commit to putting customer experience as a key priority area in our businesses, then it starts to embed itself in our culture, and it becomes something that we do, not because we have to do it, but it's because of who we are. And it means that when you think about culture, we see the leadership in it. And that's why in some organizations, you might find that there are different cultures in different departments, based on the leadership. But what is important is really to define what sort of culture do you want at the corporate level? What does a healthy CX culture look like? What are some of the elements that need to be taken away from a culture? If for example, there is a level of toxicity in an organization, if there is a level of negative attitude towards customers, what is it that needs to be done to then be able to address that and to be able to build a healthy culture, where everybody feels that they can solve for the customer, where everybody feels that the customer is really the reason that they show up to work every day. So culture is at the center of it all, and this has to be driven by leadership. So the leadership responsibility is huge. I think it's John Maxwell who said, everything rises and falls with the leadership. And I believe that even for customer experience, when you see organizations having not very great experiences, look at the leadership. When you see organizations really driving exceptional customer experiences, look at the leadership, because they're the ones who make it happen. Thank you, Daudi.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lucy. Actually, that brings us to the end of the interview. But just before we let you go, what parting advice or golden nugget would you leave with our listeners, those at the leadership level, those at the management level, and those that actually are just new to customer experience. It's a phenomenon maybe they've just heard about. What parting words of wisdom would you like to share with us?
Probably back to the main subject of today's conversation around the individual responsibility. What I would like to say is that when every employee embraces their individual responsibility in customer experience, it collectively leads to a culture that is customer centric. And of course, this in turn results to satisfied and loyal customers, to a positive word of mouth, and ultimately the organization benefits through the reputation, through an improvement in the top line and the bottom line. So let's take up our individual responsibility and let us deliver on the customer expectations. Thank you.
All right. And just before we let you go, can you just let the listeners and viewers know how they can get in touch with you, where they can learn more about Evolve, if there's anything coming up, just share with us.
Thank you, Daudi. Yes, there is always a lot happening. Every Tuesday, we do have a training program that helps to demystify customer experience, and we run that virtually. So available to can be found across our social channels, on our website, and our social media channels. In fact, if you simply just Google Evolve CX, then you'll be able to find us. You can follow me on Twitter at Kiruthu Lucy. That's my Twitter handle. Or we can be able to connect via LinkedIn, just like we connected with Daudi. Yeah. So let's connect, and let's keep making our customer experiences a little better every day.
Well, that brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Dr. Lucy, for sharing a moment with us. We've certainly learned a lot, and seeing as it's CX month, we would like to encourage everyone listening not to just celebrate their customers once a month or once a week, or 1 week in the year, but to do that all year round, and that will obviously keep them coming and gaining more supporters your direction. So thank you so much, Dr. Lucy. We wish you the very best.
Thank you, Daudi, and thank you to our listeners.